welcome to the League of Women Voters of Chicago Zooming with the Alderman series. My name is Annie Logue. I am a past president of the League of Women Voters. The League was founded 101 years ago here in Chicago, and it is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, influences public policy through education and advocacy. The Chicago League is one of hundreds of local leagues all across the country. These interviews with the aldermen are part of our efforts to educate people about those who represent us in setting the policies and ordinances that govern us here in Chicago. Today, our guest is Alderman Raymond Lopez of the 15th Ward. We appreciate your taking this time to be here with us. Please know that this session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after today on the League website. We'll be sending you and everyone who registered for this program who is not a member a link to the video when it becomes available. And everyone should know that we have provided the alderman a copy of the questions that I'll be asking ahead of time. Before we start on those questions, we want to show you a map of all the 50 wards in Chicago. There we go. And the cursor shows you the location of the 14th Ward. And then we have a map of the ward itself so that you can see 24 precincts and a little bit of an unusual shape, although apparently the ward boundaries will be changing soon. Maybe?
Absolutely, maybe. They will be.
So our first question is just that. Could you describe your ward? Tell us a little bit about where it is in the boundaries, the neighborhoods that it includes, and kind of the mix of residential and industrial and commercial.
Sure, and Annie, it's my pleasure to be here with the League of Women Voters for this great way to describe my ward. I'm very proud of the 15th Ward. It is comprised of some of the most historic neighborhoods in the city of Chicago: West Englewood, Gage Park, Back of the Yards, and Brighton Park. It was designed to be a Latino influence ward during the last remap, where the population is majority Latino. I think at that time it was 67% Latino. However, its voting population was over 52% African American. I'm very thankful for that dynamic because it's allowed me to be a more inclusive politician as opposed to one who's just stuck dealing with one demographic or another. I've had to learn how to navigate all worlds simultaneously. And yes, the remap of the city of Chicago's wards will begin next month in September, following the results of the United States Census, which happens every 10 years and just completed. So we'll see what the population and the maps look like as it relates to my ward. You know, I'm kind of in between some of the larger African-American populations and Hispanic populations on the southwest side of the city of Chicago. So you're gonna see some flux going on right there. But it's my hope that, you know, we'll be able to provide some continuity for the communities I represented, which had long kind of been on the fringe of all the wards during all the remaps. And we've seen where that has led to some historic disinvestment in many communities, particularly West Englewood and Back of the Yards, where they were just kind of the afterthought for someone else. And we've been able to really knuckle down and focus over the last several years on rebuilding the infrastructure and laying the groundwork for what I hope can be a generation of prosperity in those communities that were long forgotten.
Okay. And what are a few of the key issues that are facing the people of your ward?
You know, when I was first elected in 2015, the issues were jobs, city services, public safety, and education. And depending on the neighborhood, they varied in which one was the most important. But right now, without question, the number one issue in all four communities that I represent is public safety. People want to feel safe in their communities. They want their children to be safe when they go to school. They want their husbands, wives, brothers, and sisters to be safe when they go to work. And I think that is something that is a universal want, not just in the four communities I represent, but in all the communities throughout the city of Chicago, particularly now where we feel that looming threat in the shadows, no matter where you live.
And when did you first join the city council? And why did you decide to run for alderman again in 2019? And I'm also curious if you have any other employment.
Well, I can answer the first one. I am a full-time alderman. I believe that anyone who wants to do this job right has to put all their attention into it, particularly in wards like mine where you have a lot of challenges. You don't have the luxury of being distracted by a side job or other things. You know, focusing on the people that elected you should be the priority. And that has been my only employment since I was elected and sworn into office of May 2015 and re-elected and sworn in May 2019. I ran for this office quite reluctantly, actually, in 2011, when I was upset with my alderman at the time, who I had not known and who was not very customer friendly and was not very helpful to me. And I was upset, having been somewhat familiar with aldermen in the political process growing up in Garfield Ridge. I knew what people should expect from their aldermen and elected officials when you ask them for help. And receiving none of that from my alderman at the time, you know, I try to convince all of my neighbors someone needs to run against that person. None of us knew who the alderman was, even though she had an office 3 blocks away from our house. But after failing to convince any of my neighbors to run, that person wound up being me. And I didn't know much about the ward boundaries, never ran for elected office, and took that alderman into a runoff, and then just kept at it. And I promised the residents, even after I lost, that I would not disappear like so happens so often when people run for office. I said I would stick around because I believe that we had to do better and that I would show them better. And even though I lost in 2011, I was subsequently elected as Democratic committeeman in 2012 and pursued on. And at that time, we were in the middle of another remap. And there was a lot of discussion about whether aldermen were supposed to represent the old map or new map. And, you know, a lot of influx areas kind of left in limbo. So using my position as committeeman, which was unpaid, just a political party post, I basically kind of became the de facto alderman for the new ward because our existing alderman chose to represent the ward that she was elected under. And all of the surrounding aldermen were focusing on the wards that they were now representing under the new map, which left 40,000 people without anywhere to go. So even though it wasn't necessarily my job and I still was working for the airlines at the time, you know, we were able to help kind of with the basics of just giving people a place to kind of go and get information and coordinate how to get through those couple of years that were kind of very difficult for the neighborhoods.
It was a strange time, and
yes,
the league was involved with some litigation over that issue because there were people who were not, you're right, who were not represented because of how the situation was handled.
Yes.
What city council committees do you serve on, and are you chair or vice chair of any of them?
Under the previous administration, I was vice chair of the Committee on Human Relations. I currently serve on the Committee of Finance, Committee on Zoning, Landmarks and Buildings, Committee on Housing and Real Estate, Committee on Aviation, Committee on Public Safety, and I believe a Committee on Education.
A lot.
As well as Committee on Workforce Development.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I think I have the highest roster.
Okay.
And it should be known for your viewers that despite all my committee memberships, I also have had the best attendance, particularly when we were in person, of any alderman last term for the last 4 years. And I'm pretty sure that I'm up there again, usually in the mid 90s 90 percentile.
Alderman, I think Annie lost her internet connection. So this is Priscilla Mims, and I'm going to continue on with that.
Okay.
What, if any, changes would you like to see made in the operation of the council?
I believe that the city council has a very vital role in how we administer governance in the city of Chicago. The legislation that we deal with is not just routine and mundane matters, but some very high profile items as well. What I would like to see is a little more transparency and ease of access for everyday Chicagoans to know what exactly is going on. I believe one of the big issues that we oftentimes see that is frustrating not only for residents and not-for-profits and organizations like the League of Women Voters, but just newspapers and everyday Chicagoans is those last-minute substitute ordinances that are never published, never given in advance, and nobody has a chance to review them before they go to a committee vote on the same day that they are introduced. I think that is something that we need to start limiting, perhaps even putting time limits on when you can file a substitute so that maybe it's 48 hours in advance so people have at least 2 days time to review them. Also, I think the same applies for direct introductions. I think that's something that we need to limit and or eliminate. That is where the mayor or alderman can, on the same day a committee meets, introduce something brand new that no one's ever seen or had a chance to discuss for consideration, because that completely cuts out the public and organizations' ability to not only review it, but to also offer an opinion on it. And I think that's very poor government. And we've seen government, and I think we've seen more of that as of late. I also think that aldermen are not immune as well. I think that we have to focus on not only maintaining that 48-hour filing notice that we do now for new legislation, but I think we also have to focus on having time limits as when we act on legislation. No longer should city council or aldermen be able to just put a brick on things without going on the record saying that that's exactly what their intent is to do. You know, recently I made a motion about a zoning change and I deferred it for 3 years, but there was a reason. And I was also letting people know that we were not going to review this matter for 3 years because we wanted to effectively kill it. But we also know that there are some colleagues who will just hold things in committee with zero explanation, and people are just left in a lurch. So I think we need to start addressing some of those issues so that if you're not going to go on record, as I did, and make a legislative action to hold something indefinitely, then aldermen should be required to, within, say, 10 business days, give a person, a business, an organization an answer legislatively when it comes to some of the issues that we see before the city council, particularly when it comes to matters of zoning or licensing or permitting, where we know thousands of dollars are at stake, and sometimes aldermanic personalities or prerogative hamper that progress moving forward.
I totally agree. The league, city government committee of the league has recently come across some of those situations where substitutes were introduced, and we were following it and weren't able to access the legislation until after not only after the committee had voted on it, but not until after the city council had voted on it. So it is definitely a problem.
And to be fair, most aldermen don't see those substitutes until the morning of. You might have a 10 a.m. hearing and get an email at 8:30, 9:15 in the morning with the substitute. And there's no way someone in my position can read through something that's 25 pages perhaps or longer and know exactly what questions to ask or where the problems are. And oftentimes those substitutes are not just technical substitutes, but they are transformative substitutes. So you don't necessarily get to see what they would call like the red line version of what was changed from the one you were planning on discussing versus the one that's before you.
We talked a little bit about the remap process. And the league has long supported having an independent commission draw the ward boundaries rather than having the aldermen determine them. And would you support the concept of creating an independent commission to draw the next set of ward boundaries? And what are some of the key elements you would want to be included? And if you don't support it, I'd like to know why not.
So for me, the issue is twofold. I think, one, I don't believe politicians should get to pick their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the constituents that get to pick their politicians. So I can say that I do, in fact, have an openness and a willingness to look at what we can do to incorporate an independent commission creating maps for the city of Chicago. That said, I also know that we have to address issues as it relates to the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. I understand that, and I don't know exactly how we mesh the two, which is why I kind of leave it as an open-ended question of how to move forward on that matter, because I do know that what we do want is a map that will be successful, both in terms of the law as it is written, as well as ensuring what our municipal code says, which is compact and contiguous wards, which clearly was not in anyone's mindset 10 years ago. But I will say this: I think that there is value to having an independent commission create maps, based on if it's 50,000 people, you start in one corner, box out 50, 50, 50, 50. I think there's value to that. And I say this from the standpoint that I know that we are so often focused on minority representation. I understand that. I understand that's the root of the Voting Rights Act, importance on city council to ensure minority participation. But I also know that that kind of stymies our ability and our leaders' ability to cross beyond the demographics that they know best and serving the population as a whole. My ward, I don't have the luxury of being solely Latino or solely African-American ward. I had to learn how to navigate both communities because that's how my ward was drawn. And it makes me a better elected official and public leader to be able to understand both and show both how they are interconnected as opposed to pitting them against each other when I don't have to deal with the other, as so many of my colleagues do. So I do believe that there is a way and there should be a way to move forward. I just don't know how we mitigate the issues of the Voting Rights Act with regards to that. I think that natural population segregation in the city of Chicago would probably mitigate that on its own. But without seeing how it would be created, I can't say for certain.
Yeah. Well, it's not an easy process. And I know that sometimes when people look at it, they think it should be easy, and it's not, but it could be better, I think is
But I will say this, Annie, I think the failure of city council for decades now is that no one ever has this conversation in advance of remap. We've had 10 years since the last remap to do a pilot. We could have done a mock remap a year ago just to see what this would have looked like based on numbers from last year. We could have done this all in advance to see what tweaks we could have made if we were truly committed to that. And far too often, as we just saw in Springfield, and as I'm sure we're going to see in a few months, we're not committed to letting the districts fall where they may and letting the best candidates rise. We're only focusing on incumbent protection at every level.
And that's somewhat related to our next question, which is currently when one candidate for mayor or alderman does not receive at least 50% of the vote plus one, then the top two vote getters go into the ballot on a runoff. And what is your view about using ranked choice voting in the February general election to determine the winner instead of the runoff?
Well, I think we've seen a progression of election day evolution going back from when I think Richard M. Daley was, or back when actually go to when Harold Washington was elected. when we still had Democratic and Republican primaries in the city of Chicago, and then switching over, I think it was during Richard M. Daley's tenure, to the nonpartisan elections, which is what you described. And we've seen some of this ranked choice voting styles in New York and other cities. Again, I think that's something that we can start taking a look at. I don't know if that is something that would work well in all Chicago communities, but I'm open to seeing what the experiences were in other cities, and if that is something that we should apply here as well.
Okay.
Not a hard no, but it's not a yes.
If the league wanted to support one of your initiatives, or really anybody, what steps would you recommend they take? Do you want people to meet with you? Do you want people to come to ward night? How do you want to work with your community and community organizations?
Well, my residents have always been able to come to ward night. I'm one of the few aldermen that actually does ward night twice a week. Because I maintain 2 ward offices with the same aldermanic expense account that everyone else usually maintains one. So I have a ward office in Brighton Park, on 42nd and Archer, as well as one in West Englewood on 64th and Ashland. And I maintain a ward night on Wednesdays and Thursdays, depending which location we're talking about. But I'm also a 21st century alderman too. You know, people can contact me via email, social media, text messaging, direct messaging, you name it. I take it all. And I'm generally the one who you're answering and speaking with on all of those platforms. I have no problem taking phone calls from either my constituents who know that they could walk in without an appointment, and if I'm here and available, I'm here for them and available. Or making appointments with individuals who may have issues or questions about some ordinance or legislation, either that I'm introducing or supporting, or that they would like me to consider. I try to be as accessible as possible, particularly coming out of COVID. I know how difficult it was for many Chicago residents to try and find their local electeds, least of all their aldermen, during the pandemic. My office remained open the entire time. We had safety protocols in place. I think I was one of the first ones to have the thermometer checks in the ward offices. We were doing all of that so that we could be accessible. And now, as we're hopefully trying to emerge from the fog of COVID, I'm still accessible. But people are welcome to email me directly. They can email the office. I have no fear from being in contact with people or hearing their ideas either. Okay,
that's good to know. Good to know. And what are some of the things I will say this though. There is only one caveat. If you're going to come visit me in the office, just know that I usually have 2 of my dogs with me. So you better be a dog lover. That is important to know. What are some what are some things that you hope to get done or get started between now and the end of your term in 2023?
I think for me, what I would like to focus on is to button down some of the primary city service issues that we've seen kind of fall through the cracks over the last 16 months, 18 months in particular. We were seeing some issues going on before COVID, and my goal is to ensure that, particularly when it comes to our newest contract vendors for our departments, that we are in fact receiving the services and goods that we are paying for the city, for the citizens of Chicago. I know the mayor's focus has been on other things. So it's my goal to ensure, having seen how things were supposed to work under one mayor, that they continue to work that way under this one.
Yeah.
Legislatively, I don't necessarily have a primary target, but we shall see.
So Alderman Lopez, we want to thank you so much for being with us today. It's been really interesting learning more about your ward and listening to a lot of your ideas. I want to remind everyone watching that a link to this program will be found on the Chicago League's website. Everyone who is registered for today's program who is not a league member will receive an email with the link along with an invitation to join the league and our work in improving voter services and education in the city of Chicago. You will also receive notices of future programs that we're doing. And our next aldermanic interview will be with Alderman Derek Curtis of the 18th Ward, which will premiere on August 19th. And we will be providing information on that as it comes available. So thank you very much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.